In this lesson, we will begin analyzing our data file in SOLID. Now, the last time we worked with SOLID, we had our dictionary in a file that ended with .text, and I've actually adjusted the name since I've done some things to it since we last looked at it. And then the settings file is the .solid file. Now, if you've been using it and you have SOLID installed and it's associated, then you should see the SOLID icon on a file that ends with .solid. And if you see that, then that tells you that you can just double-click this file, and that will open up SOLID with that file, with that database loaded. So when you're working with SOLID, your data is loaded over here on the right, and in the lower left, you see all these messages about markers that could not be placed. And it can be difficult to know where to begin. You could just start at the top and go down, but often that isn't necessarily the best thing to do. There is a strategy, there is a way to think about it, and there's some flexibility within that, but it does help to have different categories of errors. So one of the most important things about a database file is the main skeletal structure of it. And the main points of hierarchy in a dictionary file are what marks the beginning of a sense, and that might be the SN marker or PS, and they're interrelated. So one of the most important things to figure out is what's happening with SN and PS in the file, and are the things under them that are supposed to be, things that are at sense level versus entry level. So that's the highest level structure. Now, some of these errors have just a handful. There's just a 1 or a 4 or a 3. And so I call these the little onesie-twosie errors. So those are the small errors. So that's a second category, is the low-hanging fruit. And then in the middle, we see these other ones that aren't related to the SNPS, and they have a higher number of errors. And I call these the mid-level or medium errors. And I tend to tackle those last. Sometimes I might start with the low-hanging fruit, or I might start with the PSSN, but those two are easier to deal with first, and then I tend to deal with the mid-level ones later. So to begin with, let me just give an example of how I would deal with some of the onesie-twosie ones. Now, date is a common one. The date field is usually pretty non-controversial. So I'm wondering why there are 4 that could not be placed. And we want to look at the setting for it. And here the setting tells us that its parent is LX and it can occur only once. Now, when I clicked on it, notice that the filter was set to date. Now, this is not showing you the DT part, it just says marker, but if the screen were wider, it would say marker DT. So this is showing me all 1,853, but I don't want that. I only want the ones that could not parse. So I'll click again down on this error, and I can scroll through those, and when I get to 4, I've gotten to the end. So let me go back to the beginning. Let's look at these one at a time. So we see a date field there, and we also see one here. And we did talk about this in an earlier lesson, that the one that's red is the one that it's complaining about, and the description tells you it could not be placed in the structure and nothing could be inferred. But in fact, this one isn't the problem. It's the one in the middle. So always keep that in mind, that an error report may not be highlighting the actual line where the real error is. So don't assume that just because the line is red that really is the line with the error. Now in this case we have 2 date fields and we don't need them. Now it would be important to look and see if the dates are different. In this case they are the same, so it's perfectly safe to delete one or the other. Now if they were different, then either you want a principle for how to choose which one to keep, or you want to ask the linguist, or you might put a comment in the file to ask the linguist. If you had 2 dates and you didn't have access to the linguist, I would probably be inclined to choose the one that was more recent as opposed to the one that was oldest. It all depends if the date field is going to mark when that record began or when it was last edited before the data came into Fieldworks. After it's in Fieldworks, the date modified field will get updated every time it's modified. I tend to import the date field into date created just so there's some sense of the historicity of the record, how old it is. Okay, in this case, I'm going to delete it. Now, I could select it with the mouse. In Solid, I find that kind of fiddly, so I tend to use the arrow keys. So I'm going to put my cursor at the end of the previous line. I'll use the right arrow to go forward one, and then I'll hit Shift and I'll go down one. And that way I've selected the whole line and the new line. And so now if I hit backspace, then that all goes away. And so I find using the arrow keys easier for selecting than the mouse. Okay, I've deleted it. Often I may save immediately, or I might just keep going. I will save it, and now the DT is not red anymore. So let's move forward. And here's another one. And they are both the same, so I'll do the same thing. If I want to delete just that line and leave the blank line, I can do that. Go forward again. I hit right arrow, I hold down Shift, down arrow, and now I'm going to hit the left arrow to get just that. And one more time, and again it's the same. So because there were only 4, I can do this one at a time, and I'm not worried about it. And notice I didn't hit save in between all of those, but I will hit it now. Now, if there were a lot more, then you'd have to decide if you wanted to do it that way or do it some other way. But with just 4, that was pretty easy. So once you've made some changes, this filter is still telling you the number of errors that were there before you made the changes. And now I want to update that. So this is when I hit recheck. Now, I tend to always hit save before I hit recheck. There were earlier versions of Solid that would lose your changes if you clicked recheck. I do believe that that has been fixed, but once burned, twice shy, so I just always click save before I do recheck. I will go ahead and click recheck. Now when I do that, I'm expecting that this line will go away, that there will not be any problems with DT anymore. Okay, let's click recheck. And now I've got to scroll a little bit in case it was at the end, but I do not see DT in the set of markers that could not be placed. So that was successful. Now I want to choose one more of these. Here's this XE that has only 1. That feels like a low-hanging fruit. So I will click on that. Now in this case, there are actually 2 XEs. There's an XV, a vernacular example, and then there's an English translation of it that's quite detailed. And then this other XE that says cover the pit. Now, I don't know if that's another translation of this example, or if there used to be an XV there that's now missing, or if it's another gloss. So there's a number of things I could do. Now, one thing that I like to do is add a new field, and I can edit right here in this data. So sometimes I will create a new field that I call note import, and I put it in all caps to make it obvious that somehow this field is different from all the other ones. And this is where I write notes about the import, and this may be for the linguist if there's an active linguist involved, or if there is no active linguist and this is just going to get archived, then this is something, a way to leave breadcrumbs in the data so that if a linguist picks it up in the future, they can see that this was something we were uncertain of. So here I'm going to say, this record had XE cover the pit. Where does it belong? So that way I have put a note about it and someone could look at it and try to figure out what to do. And so now that I've done that, I'm going to delete this. So again, my cursor is here. I hold down Shift, I click the down arrow, and that neatly selects the whole line, including the new line. So I've deleted that. Now, I just made up a new marker. So what is Solid going to do about it? So here Solid is complaining. It says there's a new marker. And it says it will appear upon recheck. So what that means, it's not in the list of markers yet. I will click OK for this. First, I'm going to click Save. I'm going to save my changes. So now when I click Recheck, I expect it to appear here. So let me click Recheck. And now it is there. I can change the width of the column to see it. And Solid doesn't know what to do with it, so let me go ahead and tell it what to do with it. I put it at the sense level. So I will say that it occurs under SN, and it can only occur once. And now in the comments field, there's nothing there because it wasn't part of the template, but I'm going to put something like new so that I can tell the difference between a comment that I made versus comments that came with the default. Often I'll put something like the language code in it to say that it's specific to that language code. Added for notes from the import specialist to the linguist. Okay, so I just make a note to explain, so if someone else were to pick up this SFM file in the future, they could understand what this field's about and why I added it. So that's all I need to do to add the field. So I will click Save again. And if you notice, it was telling me it could not place note import because nothing had been set for it. So I will click Recheck, and now, okay. It didn't like that, but that has to do with something else. So we will come back to that later. Because there is no SN marker here, but we'll get to that. So that's an example of dealing with some onesie-twosie ones. Yeah, in this case, I edited the data with both of them. And so then I got rid of those error messages. So now the error message about XE is also no longer there because I deleted that field. So we'll stop with this, and we will pick up in the next lesson with more ways to analyze and fix your database.